created the example. So what we done? So the example for routing. Yeah. So first point, we create a new application. So we created a new application. So we done that by using so ng generate application. So by name Flipkart. And what we done is ignore routing module. Ignore routing module by selecting no, right? It will ask so whether you want add routing module or not. We ignored that. Why? Because so we want to manually add the routing module. That's the reason we ignored that. So routing module, right? And next step, after that, we added some components. So we have to add following components. We added some components. So one is ng generate component. Yeah. Component that is home, and ng generate component electronics. So ng generate component footwear, ng generate component fashion, all this. So and ng generate component not found. These are the components we created. So I added few components here. We are defining the components. And in these components, you can keep any content. In these components, you can keep any content. You can design any content, right? So we added all these components, so manually. After adding these components, so we created a simple design for the components. So home dot component dot HTML. So in the home component HTML, I just added a simple basic like Flipkart home. So that is the basic. Yeah. And we have electronics dot component electronics component dot HTML, and we added some options. Electronics dot HTML. Yeah. So that is the design. Okay. Now what we need to do is similarly design fashion footwear. Okay, next in not found component, in not found component dot HTML, we will just keep a message saying that page you requested not found, but we haven't utilized this, so we will keep that, right? So it has to keep that information there. So you have to similarly design fashion and footwear components. Okay. Now once all the components are ready, so we have these components ready, right? Now home, electronics, fashion, footwear, and not found. We need to add a routing here. To add routing, what we have to do is go to app module, go to app folder and add a new file. So by name, the file we have to add so is app-routing dot module dot ts. We need to add a new file by this name. Now in this file, we need to configure the routes. So for that, we have to import the routes in this way. So we need to import the routes and configure the routes. So we have to import the routes and configure the routes. This is the code that we have designed. That means here we have to configure the routing module with ng module, that is for marking the module, and router module and routes. So that is, initially we don't need router, we just need router module and routes. Usually router module is to export the routes and routes is to configure the routes. So we are configuring the route. And to configure the route, every route, a route is configured by using a route collection. This is the route collection. We have to define the route collection. And the important point you need to know is when you are configuring the route, every route comprises of some details, which I will explain. So we will see that actually. So after defining here, you have the route. Every route have a path and a component. Every route is defined with path and component. We have so many other options also, which I will give you here. So that means when you are configuring the route, you have to know that route collection comprises of a set of route objects, Every route object comprises of following properties. Every route object comprises of following properties. So when you define the route, every route object comprises of some important properties. What are the properties? So for route object and how to deal with them. Actually, when you configure the route, every route object contains some properties. So we have a property and a description. And what are the properties usually? So, and the purpose here, the properties and the purpose here. So we have path. So the properties, the first important is path. Actually, path is nothing but it defines the name that is used for accessing any resource in your application. That means it is actually, it is the request path used to access any resource in application, So it specifies the request name. It specifies the request name and its components. Actually, components is defined with another property. You can simply say that it specifies the request name, how the name should be. That means, suppose I defined the path as home. So the path as home, I defined like this. That means syntactically, we defined the path like this, home. Then how we request actually? So that means the request will be in this way. We accept the request actually http://localhost. So 4200/home. That's how the request will be. That is the request path. So that means which request path so it should use. You can define it. That is how we access. Another property is component. Component indicates, it refers the component to be rendered when any specific path is requested by client. So it refers so the component, it refers the component to be rendered. So when any specific path is requested so by client, when any path is requested by client. So it defines the component to be rendered when any specific path is requested by client. So which component you want to render. So syntactically, so we defined this way. So that means we configure in this way. So we have path is home, and it should have component. Which component to render? So home component to render. That means home component is rendered. So that is how we define. Another important option is we can use redirect to as a property. Actually, redirect to, it specifies the path for redirection. Redirection is a technique which handles the navigation automatically. That means the navigation dynamically decided and automatically navigated. That means according to the situation, if it is taking to different locations, then it is called redirection. Actually, you will be redirected implicitly. Navigation is actually explicit. That is the technical point you should know. Actually, navigation is explicit. That means you click, then it will take you to that location. That is navigation. Redirection is implicit. That means when that particular situation comes, automatically it will perform another task. Means it will go to some other location. That means actually it specifies the path for redirection. So what is the point here is, sometimes we have already some path defined, and later some other situation comes, then automatically we want to redirect. That means, for example, suppose, so we have a path like, suppose we have path like, so we configured some path. Then usually when you configured the path, generally when you configured the path as home, okay, and it will take us to the component called home component. Okay, that is how we configure, how you configure. Now sometimes what happens is, user requested something from the URL. So from the URL, user requested something like hello something. There is no hello, or there is no about, or there is no something what user requested. Then what we can do is, we can do two things. If user is requesting something and it is not available, then automatically we can navigate them to an existing path. Like we can take them to home again. So instead of showing errors, instead of showing a blank, then we can automatically take them to that location. That means a path which exists. So that means what redirection can do is, redirect to can do is, it can use an existing path and redirect to the path. So when the condition or situation, when the situation matches, so that means it will automatically take to that location when situation matches. That is what actually redirect to. So generally we use to map to, so it can be used to map to any specific location which is already there. That is what redirect to is. Another option, we have path match. Path match is nothing but, it specifies the URL to access when requested path is similar to existing path. When the requested path is similar to existing path, then so it will use the URL. It will access the complete URL. That means actually you said redirect to. So you said if anybody entered something wrong, you said redirect to home. When it redirect to home, it has to use the entire path. It has to use the entire path of that home. In that case, we don't need to rewrite the path again. We can simply say that path match. We can say path match. We can say full path. That means what it will do is it will match the existing path and it will use the components and the other contents that you defined inside that particular path. That means when you are redirecting, so then we need to use an existing path again. Then no need to write the path. You can simply use the existing path. You can simply configure that entire path. Means here only path is referred, but all others also should be accessed. That indicates that path match. Path match indicates that whenever a path is requested, match all other contents also and use those contents only. That you can configure. I will show you practically. We'll see that. That means actually it specifies the URL to access. So when requested path is similar to existing path. So it need not to redefine the path. So no need to redefine the path. No need to redefine the path. So that is path math. Another option we have children. Children is an array. Children is used to, it is a collection of child paths. It is a collection of child routes. That means in a route you can define another route. That is done by using children. That we will see how the navigation is handled in another. So technically, when you are configuring, so the navigation, when you are configuring the navigation, so when you are defining the path, the important options, so later we will see some more coming in. The important properties initially required are these. So we have path, so we have component, we have redirect to, we have path match, and we have children. These are the important things that are required for configuring any route. Every route comprises of some details. These are the details. Now, another point is you have to know is another important point we need to know is the links. So for route navigation are defined. That means the hyperlinks used for route navigation. The hyperlinks used for route navigation in UI are defined by using, they are defined so by using a route link property. They are defined by using a route link property. So that means after configuring the route, in order to navigate to that particular route, so we have to use that route link property. So syntax, how you define. So we need to write anchor. We have to use a route link, and you have to define the path name. Whatever the path name is there, you need to define the path name. And the link text or image you can configure to navigate to that location. So the hyperlinks used for route navigation especially are not defined with href, they are defined with route link, right? Now, another point that you have seen in the last session is actually the target location where you want to render the component, is defined, by using router outlet. We have to do that by using router outlet. That means router outlet defines where you want to read the content, right? So technically important is how we configure the route, right? Yes, router link, right? Router link. So it is not route link, right? So we need to configure that. So by using router link, right? So we use that router link property, not route link. Yeah, right. So that is the general thing, right? How we can handle the navigation. Now, important is hyperlinks. So what we are talking about hyperlinks. So hyperlinks used for navigation, they use a router link property. They are configured with router link property. The outlet defines the location where the result should be rendered. That means, so router outlet actually. So outlet defines the location where the resulting markup, resulting component should be rendered, That is what actually the point. Where it should be rendered, that is decided by using router outlet. Now here very important is how you can configure the output, how we can define the output. We will learn some FAQs also, some important questions also. Technically, navigation is generally, you know that navigation is defined by using hyperlinks. But redirections can be handled implicitly in various ways. Redirection means what? You clicked a button, you asked username, you asked to log in. So first point that you should know, right? So suppose there is a login page. So in the login page, user will enter the user ID and password. And if user ID password is successful, then it should bring the success component. If not, it has to bring the invalid component. Generally, what happens now after entering the details, user will click on the button. So say login. Then we will verify whether the credentials are correct or not. If the credentials are correct, we will navigate him. We will redirect him to success. If not, then we will redirect him to invalid. This is called redirection, not navigation. So if you know that redirection and navigation correctly, you will not ask any unnecessary silly questions, because generally people have that doubt generally, right? So navigation with only link with something else, right? Navigation is always with the link only. Technically, the redirection, it can be done in several ways. On a drop down selection, you can redirect, right? Navigations are always handled by using link only. Redirections can be handled in different ways. Implicitly, that redirection is a different thing. So how we can redirect according to the situation, that requires some other options. Here we are not talking about redirections yet. We are talking about navigation, how we can handle the navigation. So technically in the navigation, so usually this is the point we need to understand. That means hyperlinks are used for route navigation. I am not talking about redirection here. I am talking about navigation. So this is important, right? So navigation is always handled with hyperlinks only. And navigation is defined with this. Redirection can happen in several ways. Redirection is implicitly handled in different ways. On button click, on drop down change, on radio change. We can perform several redirections actually. So router outlet and how do we configure the routes? These two are important. So link is defined so with router link, and outlet is defined by using router outlet. Okay, once you configured this, now another important is very important is remember this, generally people ask this question. So every component, that means page, every page, usually every page can use only one router outlet, only one router outlet, because sometimes these type of questions are asked regularly. So usually these type of questions will come. So generally when they doubt your experience, right? If anybody doubts your experience because your answers are not satisfying, so then they will simply test that you genuinely know this topic or not. In that case, this type of question is very regular. Can I use two outlets, one outlet? So is it possible? Because anybody who knows basic routing, he knows that there can be only one router outlet. And if you are faking your experience and trying to show up your talent in Angular without having that, then usually he identifies that you are doing so, then immediately he asks such questions. So you got that question means he is doubting your experience, right? That means he have doubts on your experience. You got this question means. Why? Because firmly, if you are answering what as per the experience levels, then he will not ask these silly things, because these are general. Everyone who learns routing, he knows that there can be only one router outlet. So, but still this question comes regularly. So in interviews, just to test whether you correctly know about this, have you implemented it properly, worked with it, they will have doubt on that. That's the reason they may ask that. So that is generally how we configure, right? Router outlet. So this is very important. Every page can use only one router outlet. So that is the concept. You cannot have multiple router outlets. Okay. Another point is path property can be configured with wildcard routes. Path can be configured. Path can be configured with wildcard routes. Wildcard routes can be configured with wildcard routes. Actually, what are wildcard routes? When you are defining the path, so path can be configured with wildcard routes. So they can be configured with wildcard routes. What is actually wildcard routes? Wildcard routes are nothing but path we are defining like home or about or like this. It can define wildcard routes. Better, I will give this point here itself so that it will be more easy to understand. So path can be configured with the wildcard routes. So here, yeah, not here. I will keep in this path here. Okay. So path can be configured with wildcard routes. So path can be configured with wildcard routes. What is the concept of wildcard routes? Wildcard routes is nothing but actually it can be configured with the wildcard routes means. So the wildcard routes can be defined in this way. That means path can be defined in this way. So we can write path as so empty, path as empty. So if path is empty, that means, what does that means? It means that if no component is requested. If no component is requested, right? So if no component is requested. So if no component is requested, then automatically which component should be rendered? If no component is requested, then what to do? That is defined by using this empty. Then what to do? You have to tell. So another path is, so another wildcard is we define path with double asterisk. That means we use asterisk. This indicates that if there is no component path, that you requested. If there is no component path that you requested, that means the component you requested you requested is not available. That means the component you requested is not available. Available, or you can say not found. If there is no component path you requested, that means there is no path, and the component you requested is not found, then what to do? So then what to do? You have to define that by using these wildcard routes. These are important to configure the path and the routes. So wildcard routes, so empty and wildcard route, this double asterisk. So that's how we configure the routes. How do we define the routes? So these are all the things we need to understand, which I will show you in our example. We will see that now. Initially, so in our example, what we done is we added the components, we configured the routing, we added all the routing, and in the routing we will make some changes. In the routing we will make some changes, but initially after configuring the routing, now what you have to do is we need to register the routing module. So in the app module.ts, so we have to register the routing module in app module.ts. In the app module.ts, you have to register the routing module. So generally how we register, so just what we have to do is in app module.ts, so we have to register this app routing module. We have to import that. So that means we are just importing that and configuring it here. We are just importing that. So app routing module, we are importing and defining it. Okay, that is the basic how you import it. So now another important point is after you registered, now you need to customize. So what you have to do is you have to go to app.component.html. In app component HTML, you have to design the startup page. That means you have to design the navigation page. In app component HTML, because by default app component.html is in the startup, you have to configure it in the startup. So app component HTML, and yesterday we designed this screen. Yesterday we designed this. I will copy that and I will keep it here. So this is what we designed in the last session. And this is actually the output that renders in this way. So localhost 4200, this is the output. This is what we designed. Now important is in this, observe carefully. So at the top, if nothing is requested, by default home should come. I cannot leave it empty. So if nothing is requested, we need to render something. Now, how do we do that? That means we have to configure the wildcard route. We have to configure the wildcard routes. How do we configure the wildcard routes? You can go here in the app routing module. Here in the path, we can add a wildcard path here. The wildcard path is, if it is empty, then what should happen? If it is empty, then it should automatically get the home, and home is already defined. And you want to go to the path which is already defined, then we can use redirect to. Where? So you have to define the path, redirect to home. Okay, good. Do you want to match the complete path so that access everything what is requested there? Yes. Then what you have to do is we have to say path match as full. That means whatever the path is, rest of the path is configured, because there may be some more properties also, which we will see them. Then it has to match all those properties and get. That means if user is not requesting anything, then by default it will get this. And it will match that. And you can see that by default home comes. So that means in the URL, I am not requesting anything, just 4200 enter. By default, it will come. Automatically home is added there. That means if user is not requesting anything, what should be the default path to come that you configure here? Now, similarly, when user clicks on this, those contents will come and those will display here. And suppose when user is requesting something, so which is not available, suppose I say about, we don't have any about. When hit enter, then it shows empty. So if user is requesting something and which is not available, then I will do one thing. So we will add a wildcard for that, and that is double asterisk. And what should happen if it is not defined? That means we have to configure. Path match will match all the rest of the path that is configured inside that object. That is simple, right? I hope you understood. Right? If you are not giving, then it will not retrieve all the other contents. You need the component which to be rendered, not only the path and other details also. Am I right? Right? So that means you are just mentioning the path. It will not be enough, because you have to tell that path should access the rest of the components also. Am I right? You have to configure that. Right? Now, if it is not requested, then that means what should be the component? Because I want a new component here. If anything you requested is not there, then new component. And what is the component? Is not found component. Not found component should come. That means you requested something which is not available, then it will get the not found component. That means here we are defining here. So all the electronics, everything is coming. Suppose I am requesting some about, and about is not there, then it will say page you requested not found. We can keep that. We can configure and define that. So usually we can handle it, right? So technically that is defined by using the wildcard routes. That is defined wildcard route. Suppose if I want here, so not that component, then what I am doing is here again I am writing redirect to home, and here we are configuring path match as full. We are configuring that. So usually what happens now is, so when you are requesting something and it is not available, then it should get the home. So that means you are accessing. Suppose you are writing something like about, then it should redirect us to home page. So that means you can do anything. So you can, why we use redirect? If there is already path defined and you want to access that path which is already defined, then you use redirect. That means you are saying that go to that automatically. Or you can say that no, pick up some new thing, component, and you can get that and display, right? That you can display. So generally the component, which component to be rendered, that means we have to define not found component. Okay. Now here important is I am not defining the path match. That means what is that path match? I am not defining here, right? Now you can see here. So when I open this, so by default, you can see it is unable to access the component which you want to render. At least now you understood. Right? So I think now it is very clear for you. Okay. That means why you are using path match. That means can I use here component? So that means can I use here component? That means we are defining component, which component to bring. That means we have to bring the home component. So that means home path has to bring the home component. That means you have to bring the home component. But very important is, so you can see here, we want to bring the home component. And what the console says. So the console says that here, so empty redirect to, and component cannot be used when you are redirecting to an existing path. At least now you understood, right? I hope you understood. That means a component cannot be defined when you are not when you are using an existing path, because already path is defined there, and you are saying that that path to be rendered. Then in that path, what component to be rendered, you have to mention. And a component is already defined, so and other details may be defined. Then you have to simply say path match as full. That is how we have to configure, right? Initially, that will get that component and it will render that component and display that, right? That is the general basic how we can define. So these are the two new things we added into the route to configure the wildcard routes. These are the two new options we configured in the route. That means example is same. Example is same. And only the point is we need to know how we can manage that and how we can deal with it. So that means these 2 points are same, only some changes here. So in this configuring of routes, we need to add 2 more here. We need to add 2 more here. So one is for configuring of the path to run, the path to access. So when user is not requesting anything. Another one is to path to access generally. So when user requested something which is not available, that's what we have to configure. And the UI, how we designed the UI. So that is simple. In the UI, I created a simple layout. In the layout, we are using a router link. Router link decides the navigation. That means which path to use for navigation. That means whenever user clicks on this link, so first link, whenever user clicks on that home link, it will pick up this path. And in that path, whatever component is there, it will render that component where? It will render the component in this router outlet. It will render the component in the router outlet. That means router outlet decides the location where you want to render that result, right? This is the basic example of route, how we configure and define the route, right? So I showed you clearly, haven't you observed that? If I don't give path match, what happened? Have you seen, Mr. Raghavendra? If I don't give path match, what happened? Have you seen? Have you seen that first? You can't miss that, right? I can't explain for everyone again and again, right? I already clearly explained the 3 different options. If I don't give, what to do, not give, or to do, because everybody asking the same, that they are unable to understand. I explained clearly, I showed clearly, right? Better to follow clearly, right? Better you follow regular, right? Because I showed you with a clear example. If I don't give path match, what will happen? I hope everyone others understood this, right? Others understood, right? What is the path match and why we need path match? Others understood that? Yeah, right. That's good. Right. Right. We clearly discussed about that. So if I don't give path match, what will happen? If I don't give path match, what will happen? It is unable to identify which component to prefer. Redirect to indicates what? What you understood, Mr. Raghavendra, by name redirect to? Redirect to means what you understood by meaning redirect to? Redirect to means it will redirect to that path, not the component. Are you clear now? Not to the component. It will redirect to the path. Understood? That's good, right? It will redirect to the path, not to the component. That is, you should be very clear. Understood? Right. That means it will redirect to the path, but it cannot load the component. Understood? I hope you are clear. It redirect to the path, but it cannot pick the component defined in the path because the path contains so many other things. Now, what path match should do? What path match will do? What path match will do? What path match will do? What you understood? What path match will do? Can you tell that? What path match can do? What path match will do? What you understood by that? That means the whole URL should match. Understood? That means the whole URL should match. Am I right? Right? The whole URL should match. I hope you are clear, right? That means it has to pick up the rest of all the component contents also. It has to pick up the rest of all the components also. Right. Now, actually, it should pick up. Now, can I use a component when I am using redirect to? Can I use a component when I am using redirect to? Can I use a component when I am redirect to, right? So we cannot use a component. So then how you will access the component? You cannot define a component when you are using redirect to. Am I right? You cannot use a component when you are using redirect to. So when you cannot use a component when you are redirecting to, you cannot use a component when you are redirecting to. So then how you will access the rest of the path, rest of the components and other details? So how you will access the rest of the components and other details? So usually we have to access the rest of the components and other details. Right? So by using path match, right? That's good. Right. So path match, we have the options like now, like when you are configuring the path match. So when you are defining redirect to, so redirect to home, and it is redirecting to the home. So that means if I say, if I don't request anything, it is redirecting to the home. Then what happens is if the path match I defined not as full, suppose I later we will see point also that if I define prefix, we have two options, path match full and path match prefix. That means the prefix is nothing but by default it is prefix actually. Prefix means it is matching only this home. It is matching only that home. That means it is matching only that home. And when you define that home, that means it is matching that home, and the prefix can get the controller also, component also. But actually not only component, here later there will be several options. Like I told you, there can be children. It should not only access, because prefix will get it, but prefix will get only the component. It will not get the other things that are defined in the path. I hope everyone understood. Right? There will be so many other things present inside that path, which we have to match all of them. We have to match all of them. Right? There will be several other things. In that case, then you cannot just use the prefix. Prefix will match with only the component. Then you have to define that it is not prefix, it is full, right? The meaning is full. That means it will path, so every URL that should match with that component, right? That means everything should be defined that you have to do by using this while. So here we can use the path match. So we are defining path match. So two values you can use: full to complete full to match all details defined, and we have prefix prefix to match only component. We need to match all the details. To match only the component, we can define prefix. So that is the reason we have an habit of, because it should match all of them. So that is the reason we have the habit of configuring that as full. All right. So that is the basic option, means that whole URL should match and is consumed in the routing. Prefix means only the first route. So where the path matches, the starting is chosen. The entire route is not accessed, like child routes and all are not accessed, right? Are not accessed. So that is the problem, right? That is the reason it is always important to configure this, right? This is the basic example of how to define the routes and configure the routes and use the routes. Now, next important, after understanding how we configure the basic route, and this is an example of the basic route using the wildcards and all. Now, in the routing, we need to understand another important point, very important option. So that is about, we need to know about the route parameters. Another important concept that you need to learn in routing is about the route parameters. Technically, so what are route parameters, and what is the purpose of these route parameters? Actually, so in general, you should know that. So usually web application use a query string. It uses a query string. Web application use a query string to transport data across requests. To transport data across requests, usually web application uses a query string actually. That means, for example, generally, suppose what happened here is we have some home page. So in the home page, user enters some name, and there is a text box, some John. And when we are navigating from this home page, and we are going to some contact page. When we are going to contact page, I need to carry this username to the contact page. So that means here, so we are actually navigating to home.html, and here we are navigating to contact.html. And here into this we need to pass. Then what we do is, generally we have address bar. So we have address bar. In the address bar, so we have the option defined here. That means http:// so localhost and 4200. Now we are navigating to contact page. That means contact will bring the contact HTML page. And from home page, you are navigating to contact page by clicking a button or through some navigation or redirection. Then what happens is, into the contact page, I need to send the username of home page. Then what we do is we pass the value in the URL as uname is equal to John, like this. This is called query string. We call this as query string. This is called query string. We can pass multiple values. This is query string. And ampersand, we can pass some password is equal to some password. Some details we can pass here. Now what happens is, contact page can access the details from the URL and use them here. And it can use that username here, John, and his password like this. That means data can be transported across requests. Data can be transported across requests. So by using this query string. Now these query strings are not safe because that's the reason we use other techniques of transporting the data. If you remember, we used input and output properties for transporting, accessing the component from one place to another. Because these query strings have a lot of limitations and security issues are there. That is how generally we do, and it is very difficult to handle these query strings. So security issues will be there. Generally, we will have a page and some name is equal to some value and ampersand. So and another password is equal to some value. Like this, the query string will be there. Now, what is the point here is when you are defining query string, so many issues are there. Query string, so is not safe. It is restricted. Now the query string is replaced with route parameters. That means in routing, so we use route parameters instead of using the query string. That means generally, so when you are implementing routing, then you can implement these route parameters. So that means route parameters are safe. So route parameters are safe when compared to, but not secured, right? They are safe. So when compared to query string, because query string will expose the key and values. Here only value will be passed when compared to query string. And it provides an easy technique to query any content in the page. That means route parameters provide an easy technique to query any content directly from URL. Actually, without query string, without route parameters with query string, actually how happens is, suppose you are dealing with a query string. We are dealing with a query string. So usually, suppose some shopping site, then usually the URL will be like this. We have shopping.html. So question mark in that category is equal to electronics. Ampersand in that subcategory is equal to mobiles. In that ampersand model is equal to Samsung. Like this, the query string will be. Now, if I configure this with route parameters, then route parameters will keep your querying very simple. That means you have shopping. In the shopping, we have electronics. In the electronics, so we have mobile. In the mobile, we have Samsung. That looks better. That is how actually the route parameters are handled. Route parameters are defined and route parameters are handled. How to define the route parameters, how to use the route parameters, that we will see. Technically, how to configure, we will see. Route parameters so need to be configured. That when you are redirecting, they need to be configured. How they are configured in the path? That means actually, so route parameters are configured in route path actually. Route configured in the route path. How we configure the route parameters in the route path? Actually, we use this technique. So that means we have a path, and path is some electronics. That is the path, and we need to define any query inside the electronics. That means we need something in electronics. Then what we can do is we can simply configure. That means the path, and we can define so /: and parameter, and again /:. So we can define parameter 2. You can define any number of parameters. That means now electronics path is expecting the parameters. You can configure any number of parameters like that. configure any number of parameters like that. So that means route path with parameters is defined like this. We have to first configure the route parameters. After configuring the route parameters, we need to access these route parameters and use these route parameters. Generally, we configure the route parameters. Then how you request actual values are passed into route parameters. How they are passed into route parameters. So by using are passed into route parameters from the URL. From the URL, we have to pass the parameters. How we pass that? That means in the URL, you have to define in this way, http://localhost. So 4200 / so in that we have electronics. In that electronics, we have the value 1. So value 1. So we have / again value 2. That is how we pass the values. When you see with an example, you will understand how this happens. When you see with an example, you can understand. Don't get panic that you are unable to understand. I know that many people are very much confused how it will work. That is what we are going to learn. So don't get panic, right? We are going to see this, then you will understand clearly. We know generally when we write the syntax, immediately you try to imagine how it works. So without anybody guiding you, you cannot imagine how it works. Okay. That's the reason better wait until I show you that example, right? So technically the point is we are just learning the syntax. How do we configure it, right? How do we configure it? That's what I am saying, that clearly that it is not safe, right? But then how you pass the data? You pass the data in an encrypted way. So we pass the data in an encrypted way. If you learned any server-side technologies, you know how to encrypt the data, right? Yeah. Technically, this is, we don't pass any passwords and everything clearly in the URL, right? So we pass in an encrypted way. Data is encrypted. We don't pass clearly that, right? So here, the first point, what you have to understand is how to configure the parameter. So the parameters are configured here. How do we pass the values into those parameters? Now, how do we access the parameters? How do we use the parameters in the routing? How we can handle that, right? So in the query string, we have both key and values. Am I right? In the query string, we have both key and value. But in the route parameter, you just pass the value. So you just pass the value. There is no key defined there. That means you are just passing the value. There is no key defined here, right? Yeah. You will see that practically. You will see that practically. No need to worry, right? So just we discussed how to declare it and what is the purpose of route parameter actually. The purpose of route parameter is to transport data across requests, and transporting data across requests using route parameters is not always safe. So many injection effects may happen. Due to that, we need to go through several security features also. We have to encrypt the data and pass. But in various occasions, you can allow. If you are only reading and showing the data by using these query strings, then it is okay. You are doing some manipulations through the query strings, that is not recommended. So reading and searching and displaying, it's okay. You are handling any manipulations. That means I want to read the details of mobiles. That is okay. Suppose you want to edit the details of mobile. That is not good. You should not use for editing. You should not use for deleting. That's not good, right? So that will be a problem. And of course, you have to use all the security points in order to overcome these issues. So the point, how we configure the route parameters and how to use the route parameters. And to access the parameters in any component and use the parameters, we have some techniques to do. First, we will learn how to pass the parameters. How do we configure the parameters? With an example, we will go through that. That we will see in next session, right? Next session will be all about understanding about parameters. detailedly once you see, you will understand about that, right? Tomorrow we'll continue with this.